Hey, it's Louise, Hvala, and you're watching Gatehouse Insights. On today's episode, I'm joined by Carey, who's the Director and Head of Executive Coaching at Directioneering. Carey, thank you for being here with me today.
Lovely to be here too, Louise.
So I wanted to begin with your role and what you do at Directioneering.
I'm the Director of Client Relations for our Victorian office at Directioneering, and it's a bit of a hybrid role. So I look after clients and I also look after our executive coaching practice, and I also do a lot of work with candidates or individuals who are working on their career strategy or requiring career coaching. And prior to Directioneering, I worked for a law firm, so obviously I work with a lot of lawyers who are sort of contemplating the next step in terms of their career.
Were you in HR?
Yeah.
At some law firms?
I was. I had a really long and very rewarding career at Blake Dawson Waldron, which is called Ashurst now, of course. And so I left there about 5 years ago. And then prior to that, I worked for another law firm in Sydney called Abbott Tout Russell Kennedy. And so I have worked with lawyers for my whole professional career.
So you would have seen some lawyers fast track their career from juniors right up until partner level. And you would have seen some that have made it, some that weren't quite successful.
Yep.
Can you speak a little bit about what qualities they had or what made them get to that level of partnership?
Look, I think it's really interesting because I think so many stars need to align for somebody to get to partnership. So it's not always the best and the brightest who makes it through to the end. And what can I say about the people who get there? Well, I think they're a mixed bag, to tell you the truth, but fundamentally the ones I think who get to partnership and then build a sustainable partnership practice probably have a few sort of key criteria or sort of key areas of competence. And one, of course, is, they've got the technical skill and ability. But I think the thing that really makes people last the distance is they've also got a certain level of skill in terms of managing people and delegating. So sort of leadership skill. And I think the other absolute fundamental requirement is business development skills, so that they're able to sort of influence clients and bring in the work, essentially. So I think that's generally what you need today. But then, of course, you need a market that is can support a practice. So there's always an X factor. There's the relationships you have with the other partners, and whether they think that you can enter partnership and grow the pie, so to speak. And there's also the market and whether there's a market demand for the skills and experience that you're offering.
And once someone reaches partnership level, what are their expectations, sacrifices they need to make, and even the rewards they receive at partnership level? Well,
I think they're all huge. I think there's huge expectations on partners these days. I think the rewards can be huge for people who sort of are fully fledged partners. I think the sacrifices they make are often huge, and I'd say that really to have a sustainable career as a partner, you need to set yourself up for success right from the very beginning. And really, I think today partners are really like high performance athletes. They need to think almost about themselves in that way. And I think the other thing is that what I've seen change is that partnerships, it's often for a good time but not for a long time. Partnership careers are much shorter than they probably were a decade ago even. And so I think in terms of expectations, often I think the expectation is that partnership's going to last forever and the money's going to be there forever. But things can change, and so I think it's always good to have a plan B in your hip pocket for a longer term career transition.
Have you ever seen a situation where a lawyer has spent so many years dedicating themselves to obviously going through the ranks and then hitting that partnership level, and then realising, look, I don't really want to be a partner anymore? Have you ever seen those situations? And
yep.
what have you done to actually help them transition out of partnership? Because obviously their ego's attached to it. You trained so long to get to that level. So what do you do?
Look, I have seen it. I've seen it two different varieties, I suppose. I've seen the partners who've invested many years and a hell of a lot of energy into a career, and for whatever reason, their time's up in their current law firm environment, and they need to think about transitioning somewhere else. And I've seen people too who've got to a stage where they've made such a heavy investment, and then they've actually decided it doesn't give them a sense of purpose and meaning, and they want to have a change. You know, it just doesn't really work for them anymore. And I think in both scenarios, really, it's often taking people back and giving them quite a sort of structured approach to think about what will give them meaning, you know, what they're interested in, what's realistic, and then actually working on them to sort of make that transition. So, yeah, I mean, often it starts with a bit of sort of self-insight and actually reconnecting people with what they're good at and what they're really interested in and what their needs and expectations are of the work environment that they're looking for, or working relationships that they've got with others. And from that we can sort of work out, well, what are some areas that they might like to pursue, really just as sort of areas of general interest. Part of that is working out where there's a connection between their transferable skills and those new areas that they want to explore. Quite a lot of what we do at Directioneering is then moving from that piece and actually getting people ready to pursue new opportunities. And quite often for lawyers, that's actually rethinking their personal brand, you know, taking it, sort of decoupling their identity from working as a partner or a lawyer in a law firm, and actually thinking about what they bring to the table, what do they bring to the market in quite a different way. And then quite often, you know, to pursue those opportunities, it's helping people do networking, which often strikes fear in the heart of many. But quite often what I find is that lawyers find it difficult to make transitions out of law firms because they've got very deep, narrow networks and not necessarily the broad networks that they need to pursue and, you know, throw up other opportunities. So that's often an area of focus. And then it's often about working with them to transition into new roles and, you know, often make the most of them and make sure that they are getting their needs met successfully in that sort of those initial sort of months when they're going into a new role.
How easy is it for them to transition into the new role?
I will say that I've never worked with a lawyer, this big statement, that actually hasn't found another role. And I think the great thing about working with lawyers, and which is why I really enjoy the work that I do, is that they're resilient, they're intelligent, and they've got a lot of grit. And so, you know, they're all the things that you need actually to pursue a career path and a sort of a career journey and transition, no matter how complex it might be. So, you know, people do get there. Often they need a bit of help along the way, like everybody does, but they do get there. And then often the transition is harder than people think, because quite often the people that I'm working with have actually worked in their old environment for a very long time. And so, you know, navigating a new environment where people don't know their needs and expectations, and they need to develop new networks internally and externally, and think about, you know, what value they need to create for the new organisation can be difficult. So it's really just about being deliberate again and having a plan and then executing on the plan to help people transition successfully.
Moving on to leadership, firstly, do you think everyone could be a leader?
I think this is a really controversial question. And I'm sure there's lots of articles saying that not everyone can be a leader, but I don't think that's the case. I do think what makes the difference is whether you want to be, and I think there are people out there who don't like managing people and find that a real hassle. I do think, and I know we've had this conversation before, I do think law firms could probably do more to prepare lawyers to take leadership and managerial responsibility. And I think there is a little bit of a lack of skill, and so then it makes it very difficult and people don't enjoy doing it, and they don't enjoy having difficult conversations with staff, they don't enjoy delegating and having work come back that's not right, and dealing with all that sort of low level conflict in a way. So look, my answer to that question is, I think a lot of leadership is actually managerial skill, and I think managerial skill is something that everybody can work on and develop. It's whether you want to or not. I will say that, a lot of law firm leaders, in my view, are individuals, are supervisors really of individuals rather than true managers. So, yeah, I think often that's what happens in law firms.
At Gatehouse, we often see high-performing lawyers being promoted to leadership positions and to partnership level. And they're promoted because, one, they're technically brilliant, they're bringing in clients, and obviously the next logical step is to take on that partnership level. But once they get to that partnership level, there's this expectation for them to lead their teams without any experience or knowledge of knowing how do I lead this team. What's some tips or recommendations you can give to these partners to help them better lead their team?
I think it's difficult, but I think there's a very simple way to start, and I think probably 3 key things make the difference in very small day-to-day ways. And I think the first thing is being open to developing some self-insight in terms of your own style, and recognising that other people have got different styles, and so really that's about getting feedback from others, not being scared to get feedback from others and work out how you're coming across to others, whether that's to secretaries or support staff or lawyers, and realising how you communicate says so much about how you lead, and is very influential. The more senior you get, you cast a very large shadow, more than you think, and communication is sort of key. So self-insight and communication are very important. I think the other thing, which is a really simple tip, is do a lot more asking than telling, and that's really a sort of a coaching frame, I suppose. But it's something that lawyers find very difficult to do. Often lawyers, because they're very strong technical specialists, they get into a little bit of a habit of telling, not asking. But it's very empowering to be asked rather than told, and it really builds a much more inclusive, collaborative feel within a team. So just some simple things like that, I think, make a huge difference. I also think you have to lead through your own personal values, rather than think that you have to mimic the style of leader that you may have experienced yourself in a law firm environment. I think that's where law firms struggle, that often they don't necessarily have the leadership bench strength that sort of sets a standard for those coming through. So I think, have the courage of your convictions and decide how you want to lead, and follow that course, rather than think that you have to be like the person who brought you through to partnership.
Now, I wanted to shift us into redundancies, because I know there's times firms make people redundant. What, and I know you help them, I suppose, transition and find new roles. What are your tips for someone that has been told their position has been made redundant?
I think the big thing is, don't go running off to speak with recruiters in the first 5 minutes. That's usually my big piece of advice. And don't go and necessarily ring your network either until you've really had the opportunity to think about your communication strategy. And I think that type of news, sometimes it's expected and sometimes it's very unexpected, and it's quite often difficult in the beginning to give it enough context, and it's very hard for a lot of people to take it a little bit personally too. And so what I would say to people is, you need to think about that communication strategy very early on. And I would say, as a general rule of thumb, what works for most people is coming up with something that's both genuine and honest, but also serves you well and gives the decision enough context. So, often redundancy is really part of a sort of a wider firm strategy. It's much less personal than it feels. You know, it's usually part of a much bigger thing, and it's a reaction of a firm to the market or client demand. So it's giving it enough context as well. And I think also you need to take some time to think about, well, what next? You know, and before you go and speak to a recruiter, you know, have a bit more clarity around, you know, what your pitch is. You know, because recruiters really want to know, well, something about your experience. You know, something about what makes you different or unique, or what's your single greatest area of competence, and what you're passionate or interested in. That's what they really want to hear. They don't really want to hear why firm X got it wrong. You know, that's not going to serve you well. They really want you to be on the front foot and thinking about what's going to work for you now. And I think the other big tip I'd say in that context is, you know, quite often the people that I'm working with, they get in a bit of a muddle and they think, well, the recruiter should be able to help me. You know, they should be able to tell me where the job is, or, you know, their role's to get me a job. And I often say to them, it's not actually. You know, the recruiter's client is the client. You know, that's the person who pays their bills. And so what you need to do is help the recruiter by having a clear proposition about what your offering is and what you're interested in. That would be my tip.
Shifting us into, I suppose, long-term career breaks such as secondment and maternity leave, a lot of people think their careers have been derailed if they go on to secondment or have, you know, a long-term break such as maternity leave. What can people do to get themselves back on track and to get the most out of their position once they come back from those breaks?
Look, I think those, I mean, I like to think of those secondments and sort of long leave of absences as sort of career transitions in a way, because your career is, you're transitioning out and you're picking up different sorts of experience if you're going on secondment and then you're coming back in. And so I think you almost need to treat it like a transition. And I think you also need to think that your career is your responsibility. Actually, nobody cares about your career more than you do, and so you have to manage it. And I don't think law firms particularly manage either of these things that well, and so I think the onus is on the individual to take as much ownership as you can, and that is about confirming or clarifying the expectations, you know, before you take that absence and or secondment, and then prior to the return, about, you know, work expectations, communication expectations, you know, what you're coming back into. I think also you need to think about it, you need to keep in touch and keep front of mind. And on secondment, I think that's such a great opportunity often that's missed, because I think there's a way to also think about, well, how is this adding to my career story? You know, what value can I create for the firm while I'm on secondment? You know, what intelligence can I pick up? How can I use the networks that I'm making for the benefit of the firm? And I think thinking about it that way and having sort of communication with your partners or your supervisors along those lines makes you look commercial, and that you're thinking about the firm, and you've got some commercial sort of nous, I suppose.
So for lawyers that are, I suppose, about to go on maternity leave or long-term career breaks or on secondment, what should they be doing now to prepare for when they return?
Look, I think it's such a big time in your life, and, you know, quite often I think lawyers don't think that much is going to change, but then so much changes, especially with the birth of a first child. And I think, what are my tips? I mean, I think again, you need to have early conversations with the people that matter, which are usually supervising partners, but they might be broader than your supervising partners. They might be other people in the firm who you think might have career opportunities that might represent a better fit for when you come back. So I would set up those conversations, and so that you can canvass the options and you can quite candidly talk about what the expectations are. You know, what works, you know, what's going to most likely work for your career and your stage of life when you come back. So, you know, often I think people lose, or they don't think about how to maintain relevance for their group. So, you know, putting my sort of old HR hat on, you know, I think being very pragmatic about, you know, and having conversations about, you know, what days work best and what arrangements work best and what sort of communication works best for all parties is probably most likely to increase your chances of having a successful transition back to full-time or part-time work.
Carey, this has been great, so thank you for sharing.
Thanks for having me, Louise.
Now, Carey and I would love to hear from you. What is the biggest insight you're taking away from today's conversation? Comment and share below and let us know. If you like this episode, please subscribe to our channels and share this video with your friends. And thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time on Gatehouse Insights.